you again for hopping onto the show and, being a part of the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I know we touched base earlier this week, and, I told you, I'm such a big, fanatic of podcasts. I've been listening for many years now, and so I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So I wanted to flash back a little bit and kind of... Well, I read that out of high school, you didn't necessarily go right into college. And so I wanted to ask, what was kind of your mind state in high school as you were kind of deciding on different, where you want to take the next path in life?
Yeah, I was already working. When I was a senior in high school, I was already responsible for my half of the rent in the apartment. And so my mindset was I have to work, I have to work. I have bills to pay at a really young age. And so I decided that I wanted to put all my focus on building my career in corporate America. And so I was working for a law firm. And, my dad has always been a big proponent of education in general. And so he would always tell me, go back to school. When am I going to see you graduate? And him and my mom, they never got the opportunity to finish, even elementary school.
Oh, wow.
And so, they've always told me that no matter what happens in life, that education is something no one can take away from me.
Yeah.
And so being in corporate for so long, you realize, that you plateau to a certain extent. And in order to climb the corporate ladder, you need a higher education. Because at the time it was all about graduating high school, you made it, right?
Yeah.
And then going off and getting your BA. And I was at SAC on and off. And I was okay, I'm gonna take this seriously. I want to be in the administrative world for law firms. And and going to school really, really did change the trajectory of my life in a lot of ways. And so that is why I didn't go directly or actually take my studies as seriously as I probably should have. Because I was working and I was so focused on building my career at a really young age and making money, to provide for myself. Yeah. And so that's where I was at that point in my life.
Yeah. What were some of your goals while you were at the law firm? Were you trying to get into maybe being an attorney or
I
lawyer?
started at the law firm because I was a student at Santa Ana High School, and my history teacher, Mrs. Katz, had talked to her class about this opportunity with the Orange County Bar Foundation and Project Self. It was a competition amongst all of Santa Ana Unified School District. And so all of the juniors from the high schools were competing for internships to these prestigious law firms that we had never heard about. We didn't even know existed in our community. And it was a competition. You had to submit your resume, this essay, and you had to interview. And I did really well for myself, and I ended up getting placed at Latham & Watkins. And for me, I wanted that. I had that curiosity of going into law firms because I thought about being an attorney. Growing up here in the city, one thing that I always heard was get out of Santa Ana. Once you get out, that's the epitome of success.
Right.
There's nothing here for you. You're gonna go off and be a doctor. These really high level careers, right? And so I was well, I don't want to be a doctor. I knew that. And so I was well, maybe an attorney. And so I was let me apply to this and let me see what the life of an attorney is. And so I applied, and through that I was I don't want to be an attorney. It's a job that I very, very much respect. I met a lot of amazing people. It brought a lot of great opportunity into my life. I got to help with some pro bono cases in terms of being a translator for folks. But it's not what I wanted to do with my career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did you whether it was at the law firm or while you were taking classes at Santa Ana College, when did you kind of realize this is what I want to get into, and then, get into more committed as far as going to university and stuff like that?
I think it was while I was working, and also it was having my parents' voice there of you have to go higher. In this country, they knew that, they understood that. Right. And at a really young age, I couldn't foresee that far yet. And so, and also one of my best friends, had gone to UCSB.
Oh, okay.
And so we would go to UCSB and party up there, you know, because they were known as a party school.
It still is, yeah.
And so I was like, you know what, this is kind of cool. And then through that, we ended up meeting other folks that were like at UCLA or USC, CSU Northridge. And so I was like, okay. And then this is probably a really bad motivating factor, but at the time I was like, this is cool to experience like this party culture, you know. I was so young, and so I was like, I should look into going back into school. But ultimately, like, the motivating factor for me was my parents, you know, and I wanted to graduate college for them.
Yeah.
And when I was in college, I wanted to do it for them, but for myself and for all of the friends that I lost along the way that weren't going to have that opportunity. And so it opened my eyes to like what an amazing opportunity this is. And I should be doing this, and I'm glad that I'm doing it now. And for me, there's no such thing as it's too late.
Yeah.
You know, because even when I was at SACS studying like geometry or algebra 2, there was people that I was meeting like in our study circles that were fathers, like in their 50s and 60s. And to me, I was like, that is so amazing. You know, here I am talking to somebody from a community that has lived a life and is still has decided to come back to school. And so all of those little things have always been motivating factors for me to go you know, to finish school.
Yeah, that was an interesting too. I first attended Golden West, and I met people who just got out the military, people who spent, you know, a decade or two in the military, fathers, you know, immigrants from like Vietnam, because Golden West is really close to Westminster, so you had a lot of that population. So it's really interesting to see the lives that people have lived, right? And they could tell you all these kind of different stories. When you have to work together on group projects, I know sometimes they stink, but other times you get some really good stories. You get to meet some cool people, and I was always like pretty I'm grateful that I had those experiences.
Yeah, me too. I'm terrible at math. It's probably why it took me so long to get out of SAC. But, you know, the friends that I met there and people, you know, older folks telling me, look, this has been my life experience. Like, you don't want to work in warehouses. You don't want to do these things. And people that had language barriers, like you said, you know, like people that only spoke Spanish and were there thriving at statistics. I was like, if they can do it, I can too. And why not? And so that is one of my most fond memories of being a student at SAC. And we were all struggling in this statistics class. It is a required course to like go higher and transfer out. And we built this little amazing community where we would come on campus and meet Saturday mornings and help each other out. And throughout class times too. And so that is a really nice, sweet memory that I'll forever cherish. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier too that your parents didn't get to finish elementary school. What was your parents' background like?
So my parents are from El Salvador. My entire family is from Central America.
Okay. Wow.
And so El Salvador was riddled, you know, in the 70s, 80s with a very brutal, bloody civil war that tore their communities apart. And so coming from that, politics is death. You know, to our families when we think about even getting into these spaces. And so that is one of the reasons why my parents never got to finish school. It was all about war at that time. And also, you know, for them, they were not the oldest, but they were the older siblings, and they had to also work to provide because it was a very impoverished country at the time. And so my mom used to live like in the mountains, you know, and so they would have to walk, you know, barefoot down to the city or carry corn or coffee, things like that. And so just to be able to provide for all of my tios and my tias. And that is another reason why they were never able to finish school. And so in retrospect here, being a first generation daughter, like I knew that I didn't have the same struggles as my mom, and there was absolutely no excuse for me as somebody that did pretty well, you know, in school to not go above and beyond and attain that. Yeah.
And I feel like when you have that kind of background from your parents or someone in your family, it motivates you a little bit more, right? Because you hear those stories growing up, and you being your parents, like my grandparents, he was in the Bracero program, right? So he would migrate from Mexico, come seasonally to pick different fruits or veggies or whatever he would have to pick, and then go back. But that's what he did for a long time until he could bring his family over here. And I just thought, you know, like, my parents always kind of reminded me of that story just to kind of, like, whenever I was lacking in motivation or felt like I don't know, maybe sometimes lost, but it was just, I don't know, it always kind of motivated me to hear those stories. And it's a trip because like that's what our, you know, generations or our family backgrounds come from. But then when you go to college, you meet, you know, people who had like great grandparents go to college, and it's like, that's a thing, right? You know, like that was a thing back in the day. So
yeah, no, it's true. College opened me up to a different segment of people where it was like, oh, my dad's an attorney, and I'm like, what? Like, your parents have degrees too, you know? And so it was really, really important. I think also growing up here in the city, or just, you know, as first generation kids, we understand at a really young age that there's a big emphasis in education, because we see education as a way out of poverty.
Right.
And in order for us to get out of poverty, we have to attain, you know, higher degrees. But it's also another way for us to bring our families out of poverty.
Right.
And so for me, it was something that I did think about, you know, at the time, was like, well, let me go to school, let me make a lot of money, and let me provide for my family.
Right.
You know, and I think that that's something that often doesn't get talked about, but it is, you know, sometimes our parents look to us too for what is the future going to look for us, you know, for better or for worse.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they kind of laid the groundwork for us, right? They put in so much work that hopefully we never have to in our lives experience the work or the sacrifices that they had to make, you know what I'm saying? And then hopefully we could do something similar in a different style, but for our our next generations, whether you want to have kids, nieces, nephews, that kind of thing, you know?
Absolutely.
So what was the decision to attend Cal State Long Beach?
I wanted to go to UC Santa Cruz. That was my dream school. SAC actually had, I think it was like a summer program where they would take you to UC Davis, Santa Cruz, Berkeley, and I think Merced at the time. And I went to Davis, and I was like, this little town is not for me. Berkeley, I was like, Berkeley's cool. I love the Bay, but I love the redwoods at Santa Cruz. I love the ocean view that you got from campus.
Yeah.
I love the really laid back feel that the town had. And I could envision myself walking through the dorms and the campus. And so that was what I wanted to do. That was my dream school. And I, you know, for personal reasons, I decided not to go there. But I'm very happy that I ended up at CSULB, which is like the number one Cal State here. And that, like I said, opened me up to a different group of people in my life. Like, you know, having different friends from different races was really important and life-changing for me, something that I didn't necessarily experience here. And so, and through that, like, through the sociology program that I entered, I got to work with Lane and Unite Here, and do community work within Long Beach. And that made me open my eyes and say, I wonder if this is happening in Santa Ana.
Yeah.
Because this work is really fulfilling for me, and I can see how empowering it is for the families of Long Beach, and I want to be a part of that in my hometown. And so coming back home, I knew that I didn't want to go back into corporate. And so, and prior to that, I had left Latham because I decided to go study abroad. And so I studied foreign policy in London.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so coming back, I knew, like, this is what I want to do, you know, in my hometown. And so that's how I kind of transitioned over to community work.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was that experience in, you know, a whole other country in London?
It was good. Yeah. It was really good. I wanted to, like, go to Germany, but I was like, oh, I don't know the language. That's going to be too hard.
Yeah.
And I thought London is far, but I'm still going to be able to, like, communicate.
Yeah.
And it's still going to be somewhat of a culture shock, you know?
Right.
And I thought I was going to be fine, and then you get there and you realize, like, damn, I still need to pay for all of these things, right? To, like, live here and survive. And at the time, I was working 2 jobs. I used to work at Sephora in downtown Disney, and I used to work at the law firm. But I was paying for schooling, and I was paying for, like, my housing, and that was, like, not cutting it.
Yeah.
So I was like, why would I decide to go study abroad? But it was a really great experience. I was probably the oldest student there because everybody was coming, like, fresh out of high school for them. You know, and you're stuck in a dorm with a bunch of people that for the first time, they have no supervision.
Oh, yeah.
So it was really fun. but also the way that their modules are set up are differently than America. And so that was a really good way for me to, I was like, oh, this is a different way of learning that I really adapted really well to, and that I enjoyed. And my professors there, like I follow them on Twitter. Like I'll email them still from time to time, and I'm like, your class was very impactful, thank you.
Yeah.
And I still, like, the friends that I made, I still keep in touch with, and those are just really fun memories.
That's awesome.
No regrets.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. What were some other challenges that you faced going through school? I know you mentioned earlier working 2 jobs.
You know, I think being first generation is a challenge within itself. Like the FAFSA application can be really frustrating. They require like your parents' taxes, all this information, right? That they're just like, why do you want that information? You know, like asking my dad is so skeptical about providing any of his like private information. And so I was like, Dad, I need it for school. So things like that, having to educate them on that was a challenge at the very beginning. And then also, you know, being a student that was navigating like a higher education institution where I really, really like wholeheartedly believe that my activism could change something. And I'm not saying that it can't, but it takes a lot of work. And coming from, you know, and we were fortunate enough that at CSULB there had been groundwork that had already been laid by, you know, many other generations before me. But it was always really frustrating when administration would like ignore you or they would just brush you off. And we were, you know, like demanding really simple things like computers. You know, like art programs for like the students that were in the art program at school and that we didn't have access to. We needed printing paper. We didn't even have that. And so they expected us to supply that. And we were already paying tuition. I was paying for my housing, food. I commuted for like 1 semester. You know, and so that was a struggle of being able to be a well-rounded student, because it's not enough to just go to school. You have to be able to work. You have to be able to get internships to get that job experience. You have to be able to present yourself as a culturally aware student, as somebody that hasn't just buried their heads in the books, that is aware of what is going on in their surroundings. And that was what we were hearing. Like, if you're going to go to a job interview, your A's are not enough. Right?
No, they're not.
You have to be a stellar human being. And I really bought into that. And so I was working 2 jobs. I was involved with clubs. I was volunteering. I was doing everything that I thought was gonna make my resume stand out, because I also did I had worked in human resources in the past, and it's true to an extent. You know, we want to see what you bring to the table, and having A's is just not enough. And so finding that balance of like your work, your life, your education was really difficult, and also financing that life was really difficult too.
And that's something I wish they talked about more, whether you're barely getting into college, like from a high school age, or just while you're in college, is understanding that like it's not all about the books. To the point where like my senior year, I kind of just like I was naturally pretty good at school, so I didn't have to try very hard. So I put minimal effort, got like some C's and B's, and then everything else was like extracurricular. That's where all my main focus would go. I mean, there'd be a lot of times where I'd fall asleep in class, and you know, like my friends would like be bugging me afterwards, like, why are you falling asleep? It's like, honestly, this is my downtime. Like I need my energy for other things. And you know, I understand that you do need the A's or the good grades to get the degree, but it's more than just having this A's that will help you get jobs later down the future. And I think that's something that a lot of kids coming out of high school, because I went to the junior college route as well, so I was a little older and I hung out with a lot of freshmen, but I felt like a lot of them were sometimes, you know, confused about the concept of college, of just, you know, in high school you don't really have to do a lot of extracurriculars. If you do get A's, a lot of times you can get into most schools, right? Or if you get A's and B's, that kind of thing. And then when you get to college, you think, okay, it's the same thing. I can just go to class, do whatever on the side that I want to, social life, etc., and then come out with a job and essentially move up the ladder. But it's not like that, and I wish that message was kind of more construed, you know?
It's, you know, you just reminded me of 2 things. The sleeping story. It was my first semester at CSULB, and I was taking a comms class because I wanted to have a minor in communications. And another thing that I don't think we talk enough about is the rush to get out of school, to get accepted, but to get out of school. And so now when I talk to young people, I tell them, take your time. Don't be in a rush, you know, take your time, truly. And so I was taking like 15 units and working 2 jobs. So you can imagine how hectic and how heavy that schedule was. And I fell asleep in one of my comms classes. It was a night class.
Yeah.
And I woke up like, and I just like, you know, when you wake up and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I woke up like that. And I was sitting at the front. Okay, it was like the worst decision that I had made. And my professor's like standing right in front of me, and he's essentially making an example out of me to the class. And he's like, this is why you don't take night classes if you can't handle it.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you only knew, you know, what my schedule looks like.
Yeah.
And so I decided no more night classes. Like, I'm going to be a full-time student. Like, I really want to dedicate my time to this. So that experience like has never left me. But also too, like, you know, there's a saying when you're in school, like, C's get you degrees.
Yeah.
But they don't get you into your master's program.
True. Okay. Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I cannot have 1 C on my roster. Like, I have to be this great student, whatever. But by the time I was a senior, I was like, I'm over academia. I'm okay with these C's. Give me my degree, you know? So I think it's like a fair balance, because I went into it being so scared, like I have to be this like cookie cutter student, and I left being so different. And those are the conversations that I love to have with young people now. Like, it doesn't have to be one way, you know, the traditional way that we're taught or told that it has to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, because you see, at least in like movies or TV shows, like they kind of portray college as one thing or another, but you know, they're not a lot of light portrayed on, I guess, like the newer style where you not so much focus on the school, but you're not you know, it's not all partying or social life either. It's a lot of like, hey, you know, networking and like, who can I, you know, basically, you know, try and get a part of different projects and meet just different people. I think that's like the biggest thing, you know, part of college experience.
Yeah, and not just media. I would say that, like, even in our real life, right, when we look to this one person made it, it's because they did this and they were such a great kid in school. And you know, so things like that, like I always kind of like, I'm like, you can be a great kid, a great human being, and not be a straight A student. You know?
And that's the biggest thing I tell. Like, I get to work with kids, and so I just get to relay that message because I have seen all that. It's like, you know, there's people who are doctors or who are now doctors, but you know, we're, you know, a mess in high school or middle school. So it's really just, you know, there's a method to everyone's madness, and not everyone's gonna learn the same way. You know, there's like that meme where it's like you can't judge or grade a fish on, you know, how they can fly, right? Because obviously they're gonna fail. So it's kind of like learning how everyone learns, and then kind of like grooving them towards wherever their interests are, or that kind of thing.
And we also need to be able to give people the room to learn, you know, because I think a great example is that, like, for lawyers, nobody asks you what your score is on the bar. You know, they just know you passed. And they know that you have experience under your belt, and that experience speaks for itself. And so that is why they're coming to you for help now. So things like that, you know, are really important, and not so much placing an emphasis on like these tests that society tells us are like a measure of our intelligence. So things like that.
So you mentioned while you were at Cal State Long Beach, you got to do some work in the community. Was it something that you were able to do right away here in Santa Ana, or did you have to take some time to, as far as like discover organizations?
I knew that I didn't want to be that person that came back home and was like, I have all of the answers.
Oh, okay.
So first and foremost, like, I needed to educate myself on what were the organizations that were already here, what orgs were working together, and where could I like help uplift, right? And so I started to go to like all the meetings. That is really how I started. I'm a very inquisitive person to begin with, so I will always kind of question things and ask questions. And so I go to everything that I can go to. And so I started going to community workshops, community meetings that the city was hosting. I was going to council meetings, and like flyers would be circulated on Facebook, and I'd be like, oh, this looks cool, like I'll check it out. And if I liked it, I would come back, and if I didn't like it, I wouldn't come back. And I just started to do like a lot of research on my own, and then that's how I ended up figuring out what orgs were already in the city and what I wanted to support. And so that's kind of still the mindset or the approach that I take to things, because I don't think that I'm like the one person with all of the answers to things, right? And there's already work that has been established here. And one of the really cool things that I found out was there's been a long history of organizing here in the city.
Yeah.
You know, that Santaneros have been at the forefront of.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I heard like during this election was like, nobody cares about politics here in the city. And I was like, no, people have cared for a long time. You just don't know the history of that in the city. So I think there's a big difference there. And so, you know, when we talk about like rent control issues, that's something that has been going on for years here. When we talk about defending public land, that's something that has been going on for years here. And just like equity in general, that's something that community members have been asking for a really long time. And so like those are all the fights that I like to get to know about and learn more about, and then ask myself, how can I help?
Yeah.
And you mentioned
it earlier when we were talking about how the narrative, at least when you grow up in Santa Ana, is to get a degree and get out of Santa Ana. And I think maybe that's why sometimes the feeling is like we don't care about politics or we don't care about different things, because it's as if you can make it out, then you're gonna leave, right? Why would you stay here if you had any kind of success, any kind of plan, business opportunity, etc. But I think that's also that misconstrued narrative too. There's a lot of people who do come back, and that's the coolest thing I think about like starting this podcast and interviewing different people of the community, is you get to see a lot of people who are coming back, whether it's in different departments, right? Whether it's through law, you know, all kinds of things. I'm kind of drawing up like right now, but all kinds of stuff, you know, and you kind of see the different candidates and what their background is, and it's just interesting to see like how many people actually do give back, and I think we need to highlight those people more, because it is kind of misconstrued as even in all like urban cities, right, that have a lot of like, you know, violence and crime. It's like, hey, if you get, you know, successful by any means, get out of here. But that's, I think that kind of ruins the city itself furthermore.
It does, because number one, I think that we're alluding to the fact that like, get out because there's something here for you. But my family is here. I'm not gonna abandon my family. And why wouldn't I want to give back to the community that in one way or another helped me, right? And so I think that there's a lot of young talent here. I think that there's a lot of young people that are often sidelined, and we focus on like the one or two bright stars, and say, okay, so now you go out to the world and you represent the city of Santa Ana. When that representation comes in different forms and different ways. And so for me, I'm very fortunate that I didn't necessarily buy into that rhetoric of like getting out of the city is the epitome of success. Because I always thought about this as like, well, my family's here, my friends are here, like all of my fond memories are here. How can I help it make it better for everyone? You know, and so again, I think it's almost like along the lines of the rhetoric that we hear now, like, hey, when I was in college, I had to pay thousands of dollars. Therefore, you must suffer as well and pay thousands of dollars, right? And it's like, but if we have a different way of doing things, why wouldn't we want to do it that differently? So that's what I ask folks.
It largens the generational gap, right? And that would just even college and the cost, but just with everything, it's like, if we suffered, you guys have to suffer. And it's like, well, no, actually, like, you know, sorry that you suffered, but we have this technology, or we have, you know, different information.
And it's not even
now
on the same scale anymore, you know, so.
It is it, right? It's hard to compare. I know, like, the biggest thing my parents would kind of get on me about, like, you know, moving out after I finished college, and it's like, you know, the minimum wage and like the cost of living here is like way different now, you know? And so, you know, because I remember they just continue to hound me for it, and it's just like, okay, well, it's very different than when you guys grew up, because at, you know, young 20s, they were able, without a college degree, to save up for a place. And it's like, all right, I wish it was, you know, and I probably could. Yeah, I wish it was more attainable. It probably is, but I'd have to, you know, kind of live in the dirt for a long time and do different things that wouldn't be necessarily what my college degree was for, so it'd be kind of like almost like a waste of the degree. So it's just kind of like going through that battle for sure. But you know, the generational gap only gets, I think, wider and wider sometimes.
It does, yeah. But honestly, I've never heard of, I'm assuming your parents are Latinos parents telling, you know, their boys get out of the house.
Oh no, I know, yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I know. The rarity, but they're pretty. My parents both, or my dad was born here, my mom moved here really young, so I'd say they're more, I guess you could say Americanized, or kind of, you know, more with the culture here than previously in Mexico. Okay. But yeah. So why did you decide to run for city council this year?
Oh man. I think in a small way, it's a natural progression to the work that I was already doing in the city. As I said, going to council meetings and being ignored or being ridiculed to the extent that they would always say, yeah, you're just another voice. You're not going to turn out to vote. It doesn't matter. And so for me, I got to a point where I realized, like, what is beyond organizing for me personally, and how how much longer can I keep coming to a city council meeting and asking for things and realizing that ask is never going to be fulfilled. And so for me, it was realizing that we needed to have somebody at the dais that had voting power, and not just anyone at the dais, because we know that doesn't work anymore, right? And we needed to have someone that was rooted in the community, that understood these fights, that understood the intersectionality of our lived experiences and how that impacted all of us. And so I decided it was a thought. It was a really faint thought at the very beginning, and I was very scared. I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know what that would come with, to be honest, because we've seen how disgusting politics get here in the city. And so I didn't want to put my family through that at all. And so, and I was like, okay, maybe this isn't for me. I didn't study poli-sci. I didn't come from a political family. I didn't have that background. And I knew nobody. Like, I wasn't a commissioner. I had no connections to anyone, right? And so I was like, I don't even know if I could do this. And so I kept coming back, and the thought just wouldn't leave me. And I was like, okay, well, I can either live my life with regrets, or I can live my life at the end of the day and realize, like, I tried this and it didn't work out. But now I know that I have to help build in a different capacity.
Right.
And so I talked to a couple of my friends here in the city, and people were very supportive. Some people said to my face, "You're crazy." Some people said, "Why don't you run for something else?" People asked me not to run for city council. People alluded to the fact that I wasn't smart enough to understand policy. And so I said, no, like, this is my hometown. I'm not going to be a spectator of the politics here anymore. Like, I'm going to run for city council, and I'm going to represent my district because I know it the best. And so ultimately, that was a decision that was made last year. And prior to that, I knew that I wanted to be a very well-prepared candidate. I didn't want to be truthfully a mediocre candidate, which is what we see most of the time. And so I did a lot of things to help me understand how campaigns worked, and the digital end of campaigning, and what it would take. And and this is like that exam situation, right? You can study, but how do you how do you perform is, like, ultimately the benchmark, correct?
Right.
And so I think I did all these things, and everybody told me, like, you're crazy, you don't understand what you're getting yourself into. And I think that ultimately there's a little bit of truth to that, because I could have read all these things, but being a candidate in itself is so different. And the pressure that brings is a lot, and it's a heavy one. And you're under a microscope, so everything that you say, everything that you do is going to be magnified, and it's going to be then attached to my family or to my friends in order to attack my candidacy. I understood that, and so those are all the things that held me back for a really long time. But now I was like, I have nothing to lose. And once you enter that mindset of, like, you've done so much to us that I'm not allowing this, or we're not going to allow this anymore, it brings a different mentality and a different attitude to life.
Right. And I think at its root, like, the government, the idea of this government was supposed to be, like, for the people, made by the people, right? And so that's why I think it's cool to see, like, locals and especially, like, with immigrant backgrounds kind of really represent the city. But I think a lot of times too, the people in power, they've been in power for so long, or it's families of power, that kind of thing, generational wealth. They do those tactics to smear other people's campaigns, to kind of, oh, well, that's why you don't run, because you're just like almost, I don't want to, for lack of a better word, but you're just like you're from a peasant background, that kind of thing, right? And so that's the way their family or their friends kind of get to continue to hold those offices, or whether it's at a local level, state level, national level, etc. And there's very few people that are very, like, encouraged to get into that because of the different challenges, because of different backgrounds. And I'm sure you know, they may dig up something from either a long time ago or either your family member did a long time ago. And that can, you know, kind of really be almost embarrassing sometimes to the point where you're like, oh, I got to like back out of this now. But it's, I don't know, props to you for continuing to do through all that adversity that you face.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, and yeah, I mean, we have 6 days left?
Yeah.
And I tell everybody, I'm like, I live in constant fear. Like, what is going to be said about me? You know, because we're seeing how disgusting things can turn, and how like vicious things can be.
Right.
And so it's one of the reasons why I also wanted to run. I wanted to change the way that politics work in the city. And why are we so comfortable like bringing other people down, you know, in order to gain something in return? And so I think that the Ward 3 race in one small way is a good example of you're able to campaign without having to attack each other. And so, you know, it's too early to say that because there are 6 days left. So knock on wood, but hopefully we will be able to end this cycle without having to be the way that it's always been done here in the city.
Changing the narrative too, that's going to help, I think, get more honorable people into politics, whether it is local, city level, county, state, and further and far more. Because, you know, I think there's a lot of people, good people, who probably should be in those positions that are turned away from it and doing something else. And maybe, you know, they might be doing great things, but they could also be doing great things for their community, for their state, for the nation, had they not been turned away by all the like the nasty hate and spewage. Because I think a lot of times too, you know, a lot of times people don't even pay attention to local politics and they just think national stuff. And I feel like the last 2 elections, you know, like this year and then the 2016 election for presidential, I mean, those were pretty bad shit shows, you know, like those are like the debates that they aired, like weren't even really debates. It was just very unorganized.
Well, I mean, even this election year at the federal level, right? We had, I can honestly say I didn't tune into the presidential debates because I knew I was going to be a shit show. I had better things to do in my time, quite honestly. And even now when we talk to young people or people of all ages, they're just like, I'm so turned off by the politics at the national level. Like, we're bombarded like day in and day out that I don't even have capacity for the local stuff. And I'm trying to explain, like, but the local is the most important part. If you're going to fill out any part of the ballot, you know, fill out the local part of the ballot. I mean, you should fill it out completely, but the reality is that people don't fill it out completely. I know a lot of families that just voted for Joe Biden and Kamala and returned it. And a lot of that is because of the language that's on the ballot. You know, the proposition language. I had to sit down with my dad and my mom and explain it to them. And I think that studies show that, you know, you have to have a master's or like a PhD degree to be able to understand the significance of what they're saying. And so people get confused by the proposition language, and we have to have a conversation about whether this is intentional or not. And so I think that people are super overwhelmed. I don't blame people for saying my vote doesn't count. But part of being a candidate is like having that conversation with them and helping them understand in a different way that how impactful your voice is at the local level and why you should care. And hey, we're talking about these are the 3 issues that you're seeing here. Well, guess what? That is directly tied to the person that represents you, and this is why you should vote. So I think those are all the things that sometimes people are just like, you're not gonna vote? Okay, whatever, moving on. But to me, it's like, voter engagement is something that I take so seriously, because nobody ever took my family into consideration, or my vote, right? Like I was ridiculed for that. And so that is what we're also trying to change with our candidacy.
And I think, you know, the people at the top, right? I think they do that on purpose, right? They make sometimes they highlight the ugly parts of the national politics to discourage anyone getting into local. And I also think too, it sucks that there's no platform for, you know, or as big as a platform to where, you know, you can tune into the local mayor candidates or the local city council candidates, kind of debate back and forth, or just have a dialogue, right? We don't ever have that kind of conversation, and that's really what kind of inspired me to do some of this with other local people from Santa Ana, Garden Grove, etc., etc. So I just think that, you know, we need to expand as far as the local platform so we can hear more about those local candidates, and then that it's going to help the voter turnout. But like you said too, the language on that, the propositions, like I spent like 2 hours like
Did you really?
on different websites, just trying to like get, you know, because some websites will kind of give you a short gist, but then it's like, what does that really mean? And then, there's more websites that will kind of go into detail about yes, and more details about no. And it's kind of exhausting, not gonna lie. I just finished it. I'm gonna turn it in after this interview, actually. But I feel really good about it because I know in 2012 I turned 18 that year. So I did get to vote in the, I think, Obama-Mitt Romney election. And honestly, I just filled out for Obama, left the rest of the thing blank. 2016, in that election, I did vote for everybody, but I didn't have an idea of exactly what, like, those local candidates for, the school district or city council, whatever was up at that time. I didn't have any idea. Just, you have to give you that brief description, like, teacher or whatever. Like,
yeah, the ballot designation.
I kind of went off of that, and I was just like, oh, they were a teacher. They're probably good for a district job, And that's what I would do, But this year I really, like, took it to heart because, one, I'm interviewing all these people, but two, I feel like if you really want to be about the change, like, you have to kind of do the work. And it's just like anything, and that's something I've learned through, like, sports and just, like, trying to get into this, like, journalism career. At the end of the day, like, if you're really passionate about it and you want to see either progress or whatever it is in that sport or field, you're gonna have to, like, put in some time. And it's kind of draining, honestly, but once I finished it, I felt really good last night, so I'm excited to turn it in. Yeah,
congrats. And it's it's not a small thing, because, like you said, it took you 2 hours, right? Like, of your mental energy and
just for the propositions too.
And so good for you.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, too, you mentioned that you've been prepared for this for a year, but how did COVID kind of affect the preparations and your plan overall?
What didn't COVID do? Well, I think for a really long time there was one way of campaigning, the traditional way of campaigning. And so when COVID knocked on our door, said no more. You can't go out and knock on doors. You're not going to have these face-to-face conversations. And so, personally speaking, I know that pushed our plans a couple months back. And I'm very, very fortunate that Team JLo is scrappy, that they're innovative, that they're so savvy and smart. And so we were able to take some time off and just reassess the situation and say, hey, well, if I'm a voter, how do I want to be approached? What ways do we want to engage young people, all people in Ward 3? And so we moved from that standpoint. And so, making sure that we were available on all social media channels, making sure that we were reaching out to folks from all backgrounds, from all neighborhoods, not just, like, the most prominent neighborhoods in Ward 3, and just letting them know, hey, we're here. We are an option for you. That is the most important thing. Like, you have an option this election year. You don't have to vote how you think that you should be voting, right? The most traditional candidates. And so COVID really changed the way that we campaign and the impact of the conversations that we were having, because even now, like, we have such a small amount of time to talk to people that we don't want to just say fluff. We want to say really important things that are going to impact them, that they're going to connect with. And so, talking about that, I think that we should also talk about money in campaigns. And I know that money is a big issue for candidates like myself, right, that aren't being funneled by developers or by special interests, that don't have these massive PACs behind them like we're seeing in other candidates. And so sometimes you think about, oh my God, it's going to take me like, what, $50,000 to run a field program? Can I fundraise $50,000? Probably not. So maybe I shouldn't be a candidate, right? So things like that were the things that we had to take into consideration and make sure that, like, if we couldn't come up with $50,000, then how are we going to be able to do organic outreach? And so moving from that standpoint was really, really important for us.
And now Ward 3 is a pretty diverse part of Santa Ana, correct? What just for the listeners, what exactly is Ward 3?
So Ward 3 is everything north, so coming this way of 17th Street. So we are currently at Portola Park, which is in Ward 3. And from Fairview to Tustin Boulevard encompasses all of North 3. And then it kind of drops down and it wraps around Cabrillo Park and Marbury Park. And so it's a weird looking ward when you look at, like, the map. But yeah, Ward 3 is very diverse. Diverse like socioeconomically, diverse in terms of like the people that live here, languages. And so, you know, I love my ward. I don't think that it gets, when we think about Ward 3, I don't think that the majority of people think about like other parts of Ward 3.
Right.
And so to me, my candidacy is like highlighting that, right? That diversity within Ward 3, and that not all of us care about one thing. We can care about many things, and it can be rooted in equity and inclusion.
What are some of the struggles that you've dealt with as far as reaching out to all the members of Ward 3 and the people who vote in Ward 3?
To live here?
Yeah.
Probably language barrier. There's like I only speak English and Spanish, and we have folks that are Korean, Vietnamese, people from other parts of the world, and so that has been a struggle for me. But like I understood that coming into this race, and so we made our website available in Spanish and Vietnamese for folks who have that option, and just trying to get people, the biggest struggle is just trying to get people to vote, honestly. Because of what we were talking about, I think the presidential election has turned off a lot of people, and you know, a lot of people truthfully aren't happy with the choices that they have at the presidential level, and so they're just like, well, I'm not going to participate at all. You know, and so I don't blame folks for feeling that way. I was once, you know, a voter that was like, my vote doesn't count. You know, but you know, having those conversations has been the toughest part. Like even now, like I still get people that are like, I'm not voting. You know, like, don't come to my door again. And I was like, I have to respect your choice. You know, you can't force anyone to participate in what they don't want to, you know, if they don't have faith in the system. And so I think for us, that's why it's so critical and so important that number one, that we win this race so that we can change the narrative of what happens when people like us get into these seats of power, because so far it hasn't been positive for us, right? And we can talk about representation, but our council is a majority all Latino council, and yet we're still seeing how much they're still sidelining our communities and not taking into consideration like the environmental injustices that are happening here, not taking into consideration that half of the population in Santana are renters, and they're curtailing around these policies that could help bring true like stabilization to our families. And for what? Because they're being funded by the apartment association. And for what? Because they're being funded by private luxury developers. You know, like, what is the cost of that?
Well, let's get into that. It seems like you're very passionate about the housing, but also too, like, what are some other, like, you know, things that you feel very passionate about if you're given the position, or, you know, win the position at city council? Or what are some of those things you want to bring to the table?
Yeah, I think like rent control is something that I've been very open and upfront about. That is something, a policy that I would champion, that I would definitely support. Again, you know, I born and raised here. I had to see my mom work 2 to 3 jobs, you know, to be able to provide a roof for her children. And I think that fundamentally there's something wrong with that. And I think that sometimes we'll say, well, government shouldn't have a say in my life, right, in my property. But can we think about how that impacts kids growing up in the city? Can we think about what the long-term effects of that are going to be? And if you're so heavily invested in public safety, then don't you want to do everything to prevent things going the wrong way in our communities? And I wholeheartedly believe that rent control is something that can provide stabilization for our families, and it can provide families, you know, single dads, single moms, family units, to be home and not have to work 2 to 3 jobs, you know, just to pay for the rent. You know, I know growing up there wasn't a lot of like parental supervision, you know, in my life.
They're always working
because they were surviving, you know. And so those are the things that I think that we also, when we talk about rent control, we must think about. And again, I'm very passionate about like environmental justice. You know, that isn't like an isolated thing for me. I know that is important to a lot of people here. Like, we all live in this planet, and it's scary to think that we only have like 7 to 10 years before what is gonna happen, right? right? And this year we saw these heat waves. We're seeing all these wildfires. And so why wouldn't we as a city want to do everything that we can to curb that, to prevent that? And so that's another pillar of our campaign. And also, you know, co-governance is something that we've been proud to stand on from the very beginning and say, if we really want to be representative of our communities, then we need to know and be in tune with the issues that all of the members of District 3 face. And so, you know, getting to know people and talking to them and understanding and writing these policy briefs to make sure that when we win, we can go back and say, okay, let's address this, you know, and make sure that all of the promises that we made come to fruition. Because that's another reason why people don't want to engage. It's like, I've heard this before. Why are you different? You know, like, why should, they don't trust politicians. And so we need to rebuild the relationships between local elected leaders and the community, because right now there's a complete distrust. Nobody likes who's at the council. Let's be honest. You know, and so people want change, and people are ready to come out, I think, and the people that are engaged to vote and say, listen, no more, we're not going to take this any longer, and if you want to keep your seat, you're going to have to act right.
And going back to the environmental thing, I think it's crazy. We take the earth for granted, right? I think a lot of people don't even know or are aware that how much we burn off certain things, and, you know, just the amount of, like, whether it's like waste or, like, you know, how we overfish, or, you know, we're eventually going to run out of, like, something kind of major pretty soon. Like you said, 7 to 10. I've never heard that soon, but that sounds a lot scarier than, like, I've heard like 20, 30 years. So, like, I think even people hearing that, they're like, oh, 20 to 30, like, we'll figure it out in 15, you know? They're kind of like, we'll have time. But I think, like, if you got to press that issue now. And there's people, and there's, you know, a bunch of scientists and people working on stuff like that, right? Using smarter energy sources or just different ways, right? But it just seems like they're not very highlighted, and they're not very funded. And obviously, like, you know, you look at bigger picture, like, you know, like you look at oil and gas companies, those are like, those people really, like, are like the top 1%ers of the country. You know what I mean? So for you know, them to really have the kind of the power, they're not going to let, you know, electric cars or whatever smarter, cleaner energy kind of overtake their market, because they've been holding on to that money since, you know, the early 1900s. So it's really like a huge conflict between capitalism and then doing what's right for the environment and that kind of stuff, you know?
I was listening to this podcast, and they were talking about, like, water consumption, and they broke it down so beautifully for me. Like, my mind just was like, holy crap, you know? And they said something along the lines of, like, think about it, like, we reuse the same body of water. Like, if we run out of water, like, where are we going to get more water from? You know, it's like, oh, shoot, you're right. You know, like, we tend to think about, like, the ocean being there or all these, like, other resources. But no, you're right. We only have one body of water. And, like, we keep recycling it. We keep reusing it. And that to me was, like, really concerning. And so that is, you know, when I think about, like, having a family, like, do I want to have kids if the world is gonna blow up? You know? You know? So things like that, I think that are questions that I think a lot of, like, millennials are having. So
that's something I've heard a lot too, is like, we're like, people in my generation are turned away from having kids because of that reason. And it's like, well, it's true, you know, it's something to take into consideration. Not even just from an environmental standpoint too, but with all the hate and just kind of just different stuff being pushed in our faces that almost seems like to divide us further apart rather than bring us together. And it's on a, you know, international scale, right? You know, there's a lot of things coming to light this year specifically that you can't even say it's just our country or just the area. It's kind of like international, you know?
Like what?
Like, you know, just the different things going on in Armenia, Nigeria, that kind of stuff, the different genocides going on. It's just, it's ugly.
I agree.
Well, before we wrap things up, what are some other goals that you have for your campaign and just the rest of 2020, whether it's personal?
Personal goals for 2020, definitely to take some time off and relax. I've been in, like, 3 election cycles, like, consecutively. And so just to debrief and spend time with my family and my friends who have so graciously allowed me to be absent from their life, like, this entire year. I think moving forward, I mean, we'll see in 6 days what happens, but I think that regardless of the outcome of that, like, you can still expect to see me around and expect to see me be vocal about the issues that I care about in my community. and to support candidates that I believe in wholeheartedly, and be involved in the electoral process here locally. Yeah, you know, those are like short-term goals for me. And maybe, I don't know, go back to school. Who knows?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Any particular field you want to get into?
Maybe like sociology, you know, go back. I really love sociology and the study of how everything intersects socially. And so, yeah, I mean, those are all ideas that are in my mind right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, before I end shows, I like to ask these kind of fun, introspective questions to kind of get the audience to get to know you a little bit better. If you could have any toppings on a pizza, what would it be?
Okay, I love a garbage-looking pizza, so I throw everything on there except for black olives. But I also love like Chicago-style pizza, like that pie.
Okay.
And on the other hand, I love the focaccia-looking pizza where it's like
super flat,
like the Italian style. I really like that with artichokes and sun-dried tomato and pesto.
Okay.
That's delish.
Have you ever been to Selma's deep dish pizza? And it's in South County.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, there's one in RSM and then one in, I think, Mission Viejo.
Oh,
really good. You should check it out.
Okay. Yeah.
If you could talk to any person in history or multiple people, dead or alive, who would they be?
My grandpa. Both of my grandfathers passed away before I could have any talks with them. And I only hear stories about my grandfather from my mom. And so he's somebody that I wish I could speak to and just learn more about, you know, his life in El Salvador.
Wow, that's nice. If you were stranded on an island but food and water were provided, what were 3 things you'd want to bring to pass the time?
My rollerblades, something to draw with, and my phone.
Okay. All right. And
given the fact that it would have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Or some sort of
Wi-Fi,
internet connection,
Yeah, like a package. Okay.
Yeah.
And then last question, if you could give any advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Oh, shoot.
That things get
That
better.
things get better.
That things will get better.
Okay. Awesome. We really appreciate you again for taking the time out your day. And, you know, before you go ahead and plug any website or information that you'd like to, leave with the listeners.
Okay, cool. Well, my name's Jessie Lopez. To learn more about myself or my campaign, go to votejessielopez.com. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Our handles are Vote Jessie Lopez. Also, most folks know that I'm part of Rise Up Willowwick, and that's still a campaign here in the city of Santa Ana that's fighting for 102 acres of public land, green space, and we could help. We could always use support in uplifting that campaign. And one of the asks that we're having to do now is asking city council members to not adopt the general plan because not enough community outreach has been done. And so if folks could support our ask, that would be great.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Noel.